Okay, folks are pouring in. I love these. I love these answers as always. Niece, someone's niece did something great.
Family, yeah.
Excellent care in the ER. We're glad you're okay. Kay. The niece announced she's having twins.
Yay.
That's an act of optimism
That's like literally
in these
life-giving.
times.
Went to ballet class. It's really good. I did, well, I did it at home, but I still went to yoga class. Yay. Ballet
Yeah.
class.
Decl-
Decluttering.
yeah, decluttering. Yeah, you can't declutter the nation. At least declutter your house.
Exactly.
Um,
All right.
Great. Well, we got a nice quorum in here, and it'll rise as always. But my good friend Baratunde Thurston is in the house. Love seeing him. He has a great show called How to Citizen, which you also should check out. Um, so, Ruth, what's on your mind? It's been such a another wild week, few days.
Yeah, it's we're starting. So of course we're in the middle of this blitzkrieg, and as I wrote in my latest post, it's designed to demoralize, to disorient, and you've written about this too, to make us feel we don't know where to place our attention. We'll talk about that later. Um, and really, the even though Trump set certain things up that are particularly outrageous, like the stuff where we're gonna have Greenland and we're gonna annex Canada. It's one thing for him to do it during the campaign, and it's quite another for him to decide. All these things are a choice. To decide to say to like up the aggression and say, we're going to be substantially larger as a nation, perhaps soon, and then talk about we are going to have Greenland. So pairing, my point is that pairing this global affairs destabilization in different parts of the world, different continents, with all the stuff they're doing domestically is designed to make our heads explode. Um, but we know
Can I
what
ask
they're
you just on the
doing. Yeah.
Greenland thing specifically? Like, I feel again much less equipped than you to sort this out. So I turn to you again. So look at over the last few days, two different things. The ICE raids, deportation raids, right? That is a real project. He stated in the campaign. There's institutions to go do it. They're doing it. They got numbers, they got targets. That's like a real thing, right? And then you have stuff like this Greenland thing, right? Which is in a totally different category. No one wants this. It serves no constituency. Again, to my mind, I think, why would you mess up your real thing for which you ran, had a mandate maybe in your mind, and you can like do it? What what is the purpose of the other stuff that becomes kind of a laughing stock, and where clearly you're probably not going to get Greenland, so then it's just setting yourself up to have a loss. What is the
Hmm.
point of that stuff when you have all this other stuff,
Hmm.
concerted stuff to actually do?
Well, in a sense, I guess I'd just say two things. In a sense, it's all connected because one of the reasons Trump needs the mass deportations, beside his racist visions of national purity, is to have an excuse to mobilize the military, and to kind of have his control and his vision of the military. And so, um, posturing that, because if they're going to take Greenland, somebody's going to have to be doing that taking, and that's the US military. So that's going on. An enhanced role of the military. And here comes Hegseth helpfully saying it's a return to lethality, this kind of stuff. But it's also an announcement, a performative thing about destabilizing announcing that democratic internationalism with America at the center is over. Because, in fact, all the places he's threatening are democracies. Hello, they're democracies. He's not threatening to go into China. He, and in fact, he removed aid for Ukraine. So this is his way of announcing with a big attention, media getting in a big media getting way that America is no longer going to be a partner of democracies. Quite the opposite. Whether he or not he does it, of course, he's not going to annex Canada, right? However, he's raising the possibility. It's authoritarians are about moving the Overton window and expanding horizons of possibility. And so, just saying these things now that he's actually president and doubling down is highly disruptive.
And I imagine it also, I mean, one of the things that one of the levels that he's always worked on is turning subtext into text.
Yep.
And right, so America is already an imperial power and has been an imperial power for some time, but it's an imperial power that has until now, in recent decades, denied any desire to be an imperial power. Oh, we have,
Yeah.
um, and so this is kind of again making it the quiet part out loud. Like, no, 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 we're an imperial power, and we would like to take some more countries.
Yeah. And Trump is refreshing to people because he's very blunt about things. Like when his main criticism of the American involvement in Iraq was that they should have stayed to take the oil. And so in that way, he's exposing, because indeed it was like many things in the past that the US and other democracies have been involved in, it was in part uh, an invasion designed to get oil and to, it's about natural resources, like, plunder stuff. But nobody else wanted to say that. And he comes out and says, yeah, it's about the oil, sure.
So, is there
So
a way
in
in
that, yeah.
which people are rewarding him for the candor
Hmm.
of of frankly presenting the United States as having imperial ambitions and having always had imperial ambitions in the modern era? That you're willing to reward him for the candor and almost entirely ignore the substance of what the candor is about.
Yes, and also, what does it do? It removes the idea of democracy. This is about the U.S. as a democracy, as being moral. Remember when who was it? Bill O'Reilly. This is a long time ago on Fox, and Trump was there, and he starts praising Putin. And I think it was Bill O'Reilly. It was like, "Oh, you're praising Putin? He's killing people." And Trump said, "Well, we've got lots of killers too." So by being like, yeah, we're imperialist, he's leveling the playing field and thus opening the door to the U.S. doing other heinous things, and also um, what's the word? Normalizing other autocrats' awful things. We've got lots of killers too, so we can't make a big deal about other people being killers. So
Yeah,
that's going on. I'm just thinking through, this is what we're thinking through stuff out
that's
loud,
that's
but
why it's live.
that's why it's live. So it's shifting the whole tenor of the United States, but never forget that it's taken us down as a democratic power. Any kind of idea of democratic values, morality, and being a pro-democratic force in the world. That's that's what, like a bull in a china shop. He's announcing with all this stuff. It's shocking. It's not shocking to me, but it's still shocking to me, right? Um, so I wanted to ask you a couple of questions, because given all of this disorientation and everything, and you've been doing fantastic work at the Inc. And you had a post recently about how to live under Trump, and um, you had so many interesting. So this is, you're going and talking to people all the time, doing fabulous interviews, and I was really struck by it. And I just wanted to, so just for those who didn't read it, um, is that Anand was saying that very few people he's talking to are interested in signing up for Resistance 2.0, and you very helpfully went over some of the postures. There's the retreat into private life, and this is also where we're exhausted after the election, and there's that. And you're very careful in each of these things to say that you don't see them as capitulations. They're just what people are doing now. So there's the kind of retreat, and then returning to the local, and this is very powerful, that doing things in the community, including political things, but focusing on civic life and the local, um, and then reorganizing, and we'll talk about that. And a lot of your interviews are about that. Trying to get a pro democracy movement. What does that mean? And that takes us to rethinking, right? Can you say more about this? This was like a almost like a manifesto, in a sense, not really a manifesto, but a really good summary of where the different places we are right now. It's a very particular moment in history.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for highlighting that. I, I think the essay grew out of a a strange bifurcation that I was seeing and hearing among people. The bifurcation being, on the one hand, universally, everybody I'm talking to about this is more worried about the second Trump term than the first one. I don't think there's a single person who thinks the stakes are lower, the risks are lower. Every single person is clear unanimously among this kind of group that I'm talking about, of people who are relatively politically engaged and have options about how to kind of show up. Universally, the feeling is this is going to be worse, this is more dangerous, etc. However, almost equally universally in that group, um, there was a sense of I'm not gonna do what I did the first time, which for a lot of people was this kind of resistance posture, which you can define in a lot of ways. I think some of it was very helpful, some of it was more performative, some of it was very online, some of it was very real, midterms, organizing in 2018, and various other things. But a lot of people were just saying to me, I just don't have it in me. I also don't think it's strategically effective. I'm not going to do that again. So then what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And I tried to kind of synthesize what I was hearing from people as these four other postures. So just to take each of them in turn briefly, retreat, and again, I don't mean military retreat, I don't mean capitulation, but retreat into things you can control and worlds you can control. You know, the things you can make good by attending to them. You can make your family good in a way that you don't have direct, immediate control over making, politics good right now. You can make your community good. You can contribute to whether everybody in your little neighborhood, hates each other or like barbecues together all the time. Like that is a thing you could set out to go do and get done. And also under retreat, um, I spoke to a lot of people who are in various creative fields, and I think a lot of people who are in creative fields spent the first Trump term kind of not like distracted from their actual work and craft,
Yeah.
and like trying to like do direct politics. Like I'm a creative person. Like here's why I think this is outrageous. A lot of actors did this. A lot of writers, all kinds of novelists, all kinds of creative people. Like not doing their work in a way, pausing their work a little bit and like getting in politics, getting on Twitter, and I think a lot of what I was hearing from folks is I want to retreat back into my work, into my craft, not out of abandonment, but because I believe that actually doing my work, doing my actual work, is how you make this country better. If I
Yeah.
make movies or write novels that humanize a community that would otherwise be despised, and if I can increase the kind of level of humanity by 2% that Americans ascribe to that group of people, that might move the needle a lot more than me making some speech somewhere, doing some performative social media thing. Maybe I should just do my work. Um, and then the others, I think, are more straightforward. I think there was a lot of returning to the local. Again, still doing politics, but your school board is probably in trouble as much as your country. Like, but you can go run for that in a way that you're not able to like toggle your country. Um, I think a lot of people are talking about reorganizing. Not just reacting to each little Trump thing, but like there is a complete absence of a pro-democracy movement worthy of this moment. And you and I've talked about this a bunch. Like, I'm sorry, it's just like embarrassing to lose to Donald Trump, you know? And you can't, I don't know, like I I I I I certainly blame Donald Trump for, being Donald Trump, but kind of more blame people who can't beat him. Like if you like he's quite clear who he is, right? So
Very.
if you can't like hold that up like this, and then more people don't want you than this, you should just quit your job, because and that's thousands and thousands of people. So there's going to need to be a reorganization of the political left, of the pro democracy movement from scratch, and virtually anybody involved in shaping what the Democratic Party has been in recent years should probably just go on a really very long vacation, and like we'll contact them whenever we're ready for them. And then the last was like rethinking. I think a space has been opened up by this return of Trump for actually rethinking fundamental things and not nibbling
Totally.
around the edges, and actually like rethinking core assumptions, such as, can the Democratic Party survive trying to balance the interests of big donors and the working class? Like, is that
Yeah.
a tenable thing to attempt to balance?
Yeah.
Um, is um, is the kind of identitarian commitments of the political left today in tension with being a broadly appealing working class movement? And if so, how should those tensions be navigated? Things that you don't normally want to talk about because it's never
Hmm.
convenient. Well, now it's convenient because don't worry, Democrats are not going to win anything for a really long time. So there's some time to think. And
Yeah.
I was
Can
talking to
I?
people who are doing rethinking.
Can I? Yeah. And I've learned so much from these interviews you've been doing. Um, and and uh, we have a lot to build on there if we're going to be, you know, uh, kind of more institutionalizing the recall to working class values, because you know Biden was the first president to show up on a picket line, and there was a return to union activity. There was return to appreciation of labor during this period, and yet it didn't get fully centered in the media, and that has to do with the media, but also the messaging coming out of the party. It was almost like they didn't really know what to do with Biden showing up on a picket line. Um, but
But do you, I mean, I think it's partly the media, but I would also say that that kind of identification with labor was not necessarily matched with dramatic, sweeping policy to
no,
reverse a 40-year war on working people in this country and
no,
dramatically make their lives better. So you and I are talking this week and
yeah,
last week about all the drama of the things Trump does. Well, it turns out there's a lot of executive authority lying around. Why wasn't there similar amounts of drama for
yeah,
good, right, from the
yeah,
last administration to back up
yeah.
that pro labor stance?
Then this is, the donor class, the identification with elites. This is a fundamental, as you've been saying, a fundamental shift has to occur within the party. Um, when you talk about people returning to the local, you know, as as someone who studies the right, the far right, we had Bannon's precinct strategy, which was very successful. And by the way, and it's not coincidental, given Bannon's study of fascism, this is how the original fascism, not Nazism, but Italian fascism, they first gained power as a movement with a precinct strategy, where they use violence, and they this was like before Mussolini came in, and right after, around like between like 1920 and 1923, 24, and they took control of town councils. They were also wrecking trade union offices with violence, but they did this at the local level, and then so the party expanded at the local level. So do you think that have and so this precinct strategy, where the right in America has gone after the school boards, the town councils, all of this, getting, in some cases, like in Miami, the Proud Boys, infiltrating and normalizing extremists. Do you think that Democrats can learn from this and like flip the script and have a retaking, or in places that were not taken yet, a more robust, progressive presence starting from the ground up like this?
To me, I'll tell you, maybe I think about this a little bit differently, but I think in a way, democracy is not just a system. You write about it so much as this system that can be threatened by these very powerful actors at the top. But you also have written, and as I have, about, democracy is a culture. Democracy
Yeah.
is also a way of life. It's a way of looking at other people. It's a way of spending your time. It's an up and down thing. It's not just these marble institutions, right? And it seems to me that we have lost a lot of that culture and way of life, not just the high end institutions that are under threat. And so part of the idea of going back to the local is to interrupt what I think is happening right now, which is everybody fixates on national politics, where obviously the biggest threats are right now. But I, I don't mean to diminish the importance of national politics because it's everything, but it also, because it's so remote from you, it kind of can become like fan culture, right? It's
Yeah.
almost like national politics is almost like Taylor Swift, right? That you're sort of a passive fan in relation to this giant
Hmm.
thing. And as someone who goes on MSNBC a lot, like I think a lot of the way in which people consume MSNBC is fan culture. It's like, or anti-fan culture, but it's like following this
Hmm.
phenomenon without
Hmm.
really a meaningful sense of you being a player in it. Even
Hmm.
though we all would say that nothing matters more than citizens and the most important role we all have, but like if you think about the actual role people are playing often now, it's a fan culture role. And so
Hmm.
part of the appeal of going back to the local is to like get some of your muscles back, because I think the actual
Hmm.
muscles of being a democratic citizen have atrophied when people are just passively watching these things, bemoaning things, tweeting about things, but like never gone to a meeting in the last decade, right?
Yeah.
And obviously there's a subset of people who are very, very committed. But I think of this as just like building the habit again. And then the other
Agree.
small element there is that when you go to local issues, they they don't map the same way as the big national things, and everybody doesn't quite know what they think in the same way, right? So immigrants, bad or good, everybody knows what they think, right? Trans kids should get the help they need and support they need or not. Everybody knows what they think. But when you go down to like, okay, should this lake be drained by one
Yeah.
foot every winter or 2 feet, or should it
Yeah.
not be drained anymore? Suddenly, like no one has scripts in their head. No one is being beamed information from Rupert Murdoch about how to approach that issue. So what happens is people think and talk and try to figure stuff out from each other. And
And,
my hope is that a muscle can kind of develop doing that, that then maybe trickles up.
yeah. And they're and this point about not relying on Fox News indoctrination, they're often departing from actual facts and objective, empirical civil engineering reports, or whatever, because that's what they, if not, it will be incompetently done. But I think that these local victories, I've written small victories, but they're not small, are very, very important for us right now because they build confidence. There's a lot of loss of confidence right now, and that is, we talked about this a little bit last week. That's by design, because authoritarians want you to feel hopeless, helpless, and they also intimidate. There's a lot of intimidation going, because we're talking about acting locally, but it takes courage to do that in some places because there's a lot of thugs out there and they're feeling empowered. But so having holding people, whether it's holding people accountable. I heard a story last night of somebody who intervened in a local context, in Wisconsin, to have somebody held accountable for some kind of corruption. And so this builds confidence in us as citizens. It's the flexing the muscle. And and it sets an example for others who maybe weren't involved in politics before and they're watching. And and it also, and here we have to add in the problem, and the, let's be positive, the potential and promise and importance of local media, because it's local media that's going to cover these things. Um, so all of these things, I think, having people feel confident that they can use their agency to change things, is important to getting people involved in politics and at whatever level.
Can I ask you on just you mentioned the media? I'm curious. I mean, we're only it's actually literally the 12 o'clock hour right now, the last dregs of the 12 o'clock hour. So Trump has literally been president for 1 week at this very hour.
Insane.
Insane. I mean, I certainly am about a decade older somehow, but I'm curious how you think the media has done. It's only been a week, but we've also had the 2 months of the transition. Do you sense a an elite media, big newspapers, big publications, TV, that has learned anything from the last time, and where you can see differences, or does it feel like complete deja vu?
I don't know, because I haven't. I've been writing a, some work on democracy, so I've been returning to my work. So I haven't been like scanning the headlines, and tweeting
You're
about it.
part of the phenomenon I'm describing.
Yeah, but of course I do see things, and um, I would say, for example, the New York Times, a lot of the headlines are neutral. And so neutral, meaning they're reporting, Trump says we'll do this. They're not challenging. Um, Now, maybe in the body of the article, they're raising all kinds of problems with this. But one of the big problems we have when, and this was true of last time, this is how we got here. When someone becomes president and commander in chief, the institution is accorded such a respect that we don't want to do what South Korea did, where he was impeached and he's detained because he tried to self coup. And somehow, once the person's in that office, even without the immunity given by the Supreme Court, there's a reluctance to be too challenging. And so one of the big problems is immediately the language of that person and all the propaganda narratives are kind of normalized. The southern border, the war, the invasion, and this happened again. This happened in Trump 1.0, and it deteriorated. It helped them a lot to normalize all of the things. So that's my beef. That's not specific to one news outlet. It's like a general process of not wanting to challenge executive authority.
And you and I both have newsletters, which are part of an attempt to build something different. Your excellent newsletter is called Lucid. Mine is called The Ink. But I sometimes am concerned that we just end up with lots of these little islands and communities. And my
Yeah.
community is amazing. I'm sure your community is amazing, but it's also not the same as speaking to the a broader public. How do you think about the real promise of these other news sites that are willing to call things what they are, et cetera, but are fundamentally these like small, thousands of small gardens that are not connected to each other?
There's a good, and I mean, there's a lot of good in that. There's also the problem of reaching people. I mean, um, i- when we look at how we got here, the fact that millions and millions watch Fox and Tucker Carlson, who's Kremlin attached right wing propagandist, very effective, is on military bases around the world. It's hard to compete with that, right? Even and you and I are on MSNBC, so we already have a national platform besides our newsletters. But I think local journalism is really, really important. Like, when, just to mention, when I was supposed to do the Bancroft lecture at the U.S. Naval Academy. It's a huge honor, and I was going to talk about this is in October. I was going to talk about what happens to militaries under authoritarian rule, and talk about Mussolini, but mostly Pinochet, who used militaries against civilians. And 17 MAGA Congress people mobilized against me to get me disinvited. It was a huge thing with Heritage and Federalist Society, and other Congress people were in on it. It was like over 20, Republican members of Congress. And the people who reported it was an independent outlet called the Baltimore Banner. It's based in Annapolis, and well, and they cover Annapolis because where they are, Baltimore. And the Washington Post and the New York Times didn't want to cover it. Now, why was it important? Not because of me. It was because they were MAGA was pressuring the U.S. Naval Academy to set the tone for the emergence and the acceptance of somebody like Hegseth later on. This was before the election. So it had a logic, and I study transformations of militaries and military coups. So it was very clear, the big picture to me. But they didn't want to cover it. Only the local independent news was covered it. So
And
that's an
did you end up
example.
going or not?
No, no, they caved immediately. The U.S. Naval Academy to the pressure, and it was canceled. So
Wow.
yeah, but it was also an exhibit. I studied propaganda. It was Exhibit A in everybody mobilizing toward a um, toward a common end, to get this dangerous person canceled, so that their knowledge about what happens to militaries, the moral corruption, the corrosion from within, when you're torturing civilians, they did not want anybody to hear that. Um,
They're sort of like she looks innocent with her color-coded books, but in fact, she's incredibly dangerous. Well, I don't know if you publish it, but the Ink would be very happy to run your speech if that they canceled if you haven't published it.
I haven't. Now I'm figuring out what to do with it. But
Yeah.
thank you. But it's to say that, and we also know that local media, often independent. Look at ProPublica. They break amazing investigative stories. So this is the landscape of media, and I think every outlet, even the Substack newsletters, has a function in civic education. And that's why it's very nice for you and I to be collaborating, because we're redoubling our forces and getting the message out.
And talk to me more about this kind of the use of the military, the idea of the use of the military, any kind of potential moves you're seeing from the Hegseth nomination onward and beyond of Trump kind of preparing to use the military as a force multiplier for his goals, including domestic goals.
Yeah, and I wrote a lucid piece on this. So uh, you have to, if you look at things from a perspective of a Democrat with a small d, of course, his now it's appointment, makes no sense. He's totally incompetent. He's highly problematic. He has a terrible character. Blah blah blah, and totally inexperienced. With a parallel is Tulsi Gabbard, who would be director of national intelligence. No experience whatsoever. Now, if you look at these as an autocrat, it makes sense, because autocrats do this thing called divide and rule, and they often appoint people who are kind of incompetent or out of their depth, or they appoint decent people and they pit them against each other. So the divide and rule, and all they really care about is loyalty. And so you can have these things where you're almost setting somebody up to fail, so they'll be over their head, and thus you and your cronies, who would be Michael Flynn in this case, who knows who they're going to be, have more control over you, because you don't have the respect, and you don't have the experience at a senior level to have the contacts. Think about Tulsi Gabbard, doesn't have those horizontal contacts with foreign intelligence services, a whole lifetime of professional activities that others would have. So if you want to use the military as your personal tool, he is perfect. And the other way he's perfect is that the guy's a hothead. he made a video with his white supremacist tattoos showing, selling grenade ammunition. Now, who buys grenade ammunition? It's not the US military, they have government issue. It's militias, it's hotheads like him, it's private arsenal people. So I saw him immediately given my studies. He's a bridge to radicalizing the military. And we already are seeing, we saw that the militias want to help with mass deportations. And everywhere around the world, autocrats end up having a mingling of official army, irregular armed factions, and actually, as in Venezuela, armed gangs, where they all kind of are doing things together sometimes. So I'm worried about that as a long-term trend, this kind of mingling. And we saw it in January 6th. There were a lot of people who were militias, hate groups, who were armed, some, a few active military, a lot of retired military, all together to be Trump's private army.
I remember. I don't know if you remember this moment, and I'm sure there's many different analogs in history. But during the Arab Spring in Egypt, if I remember correctly, it was often the police force that was on the front lines of actually dealing with people, dealing with the
Yeah,
protesters, and were dealing with them quite harshly.
yeah.
And then at a certain point, when it escalated, the military came in, and the military actually took the people's side, probably just reading the tea leaves. And there was this whole thing about like the military is always with the people, and it was sort of like the military versus the police. That the police are sort of these, people who will treat people badly, but the military is sort of the guardian of the nation. Obviously, Egypt has this long history of the military being involved in politics, but I'm curious here. The police is quite clearly and transparently made itself a kind of Trump adjacent force ideologically and through these police union endorsements and just culturally. Do you think the military, if Trump were to continue to go down that road, do you think of the military as having any kind of pushback power against Trump, or do you think the United States it would be kind of similar to the police and just be like, do whatever Trump wants, or do you think of it as in some ways a small d-democratic bastion of resistance against an aspiring autocrat?
It's hard to say, and those are very stark opposing statements. Um, and the military is really interesting because it's one of the institutions that is most reflective of multiracial democracy. It's highly integrated. Women are important, at all
It believes in
levels, and
climate change. It believes in reality in many
believes in
forms.
reality. And they've had a problem recruiting, and it's women who have had the surge. I wrote that in my piece on Hegseth, that it was just like three ways Hegseth can harm the military. One is that, given his record and his misogyny, which doesn't even believe women should be in combat, the biggest surge in recruitments last year came from women. And so, and then making things more difficult in terms of denouncing sexual harassment, sexual assaults, which are a problem. So that's something that's like going to harm the military. But um, so it's a real, it's, as an institution, its composition, it's reflective of our democracy. And I wouldn't, although I've been really displeased that there's been no national discussion about, oh, hi, we're going to use the military inside our borders. And other presidents have sent the military in small numbers to the border. So there are precedents for this. But what Trump's talking about with also imperialist campaigns is just a whole other level. And I just don't know what to say. There are a lot of people who are dedicated to duty and the Constitution inside the military. So I wouldn't underestimate that. And we already saw pushback within the Air Force. They were going to cancel the history of the Tuskegee Airmen, very important, along with women pilots. And there was immediate pushback. And so that was a defeat. It's important to mark these defeats that they've had in this week. This really important. They were not able to erase that history from the curriculum due to pushback.
Um, Shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to talk about attention, you were beginning at the beginning talking about the kind of flooding of the zone with stuff. They just do so much stuff. And his first day, he did so much stuff, and
Yeah.
then the kind of signing of it. And I try to look at these things through my own eyes, and then I try to have other eyes, which is a mental exercise. But I try to imagine how other people
Yeah.
might view it. And so, even just aesthetically for me, like sitting there and like the EOs and the table and the arena, like it's so dumb and it's so tacky. But I try to look at it from another way, that if you liked this guy's agenda, this flurry of action feels like, wow, I'm being defended. Something's being done, right? And that
Hmm.
most people don't even know what's being done, don't pay attention. But there's a kind of just basic, I don't know, almost like tribal old world reptile brain thing of like, the tribal chief seems like he's really busy doing stuff for me. I'm
Hmm.
okay. I'm safe, which, as you have written, is such a crucial part of the authoritarian offering. My question for you is, why, in theory, nothing stops, in my mind, Democrats from, when they have power, um, also attempting to command attention,
Yeah.
including in slightly tacky ways or slightly weird ways, but commanding it. Nothing stops them, clearly, given the scale of executive orders, from having their own, much more aggressive than normal executive orders, but for good, to give people health care, to do various other things. What is the blockage to present that kind of face of action, of commanding attention? What is, given everything we are seeing, what is holding people back?
That's the question of the hour, right? And in fact, one of I was reflecting the other day. Well, the other day, it's probably yesterday, because time is like has a different meaning. Maybe it was this morning. Who knows?
Yeah.
That Biden accomplished a ton, right? It was very annoying to me that Trump showed up at virtually at Davos and said, "America's back," you know, and America could be back with him as the strongman because Biden, uh, the economy is great and this and that, all the things he did. But he projected in our age of charismatic personalities and Instagrams and selfies. Biden projected. He did not project as a strong personality and telegenic. He was muted, partly due to his age and just his personality. He was not a kind of attention getting. There's this style, like on TikTok and Instagram. It's like hyperactive, vocally, sound, every way. And that's not his style. So it seemed like he was not accomplishing things. So in comes Trump, who's in command. Now, Democrats have been often reluctant. AOC, maybe it's generational, does this very well. There are people who do this very well. Gavin Newsom, he he showed up and he knew he's very media savvy, and he showed up and he knew, and he was inside, angle that, and he was aggressive with Trump. We could say assertive with Trump. And he wasn't even invited. He just showed up to take command of that moment, that media moment. So we probably need more of that, because people feel, and you've written about this, you've interviewed people, said that people feel there's a bit of a vacuum. There's a vacuum of ideas. But most of all, there's a vacuum of messaging. There are ideas, there are values. The Harris campaign, the Waltz, remember Waltz and his videos, fixing cars. There was so much good there, but it's the leadership and the official messaging is not giving the appearance of, this is what we're doing for you, this is who we are, and we're going to have to up our game considerably to compete.
I mean, not to be like a middle-aged person using young people's terms, but I almost wonder if there is, on the broad political left, and certainly the Democratic Party, a fear of being cringe that
Yeah.
is so overwhelming that you'd rather, at some deep level, whether or not you admit this, you'd rather risk losing the republic than being cringe. You'd
Yeah.
rather risk losing the republic than oversaturating or making weird videos or proposing really gargantuan things that make people's lives better, even if maybe you won't be able to pass it or won't be able to do it. There's a kind of risk aversion that all the serious people have, with a few notable exceptions, um, that just feels totally paralyzing.
It is. And the other part of this, I mentioned Newsom, who's a white guy and being aggressive and assertive. There's a whole other part of this where people also feel it's cringe to be talking about kindness, empathy, and the most toxic word, love. Now, love and joy, now joy and hope were briefly very successful in mobilizing people during the campaign. I have a whole thing in Strongman. I've written more about this, about doctrines of love, which have succeeded in authoritarian contexts. Most recently, Poland, the March of a Million Hearts. Literally, the heart was the logo in 2023, and it worked for them. You know, they did other things, but that's like the cringe. And so I remember circulating. I had this mission for like a year and a half to get this op-ed on love published. And everyone was like, I'm not touching that. That's like cringy and wishy-washy. And the LA Times finally published it. That was pre-takeover by right-wing billionaire. Um, but that's another element. There's just a fear. It's cringe. It's a fear of seeming soft when in fact kindness, empathy, solidarity, these are strengths. And you know, Astra Taylor writes about this. A lot of great people write about this. And hope, optimism, these are things that actually have had electoral effects, but we're like scared of them, and that's, I think that's a mistake.
We have a few minutes left. I have a couple more things I want to ask you, and you may also. But first, I want to say, if you are an ink person joining us because you subscribe to the ink, but you don't know about Ruth's amazing Substack Lucid, I want you to take a moment right now, if you can, and just sign up for Lucid. It takes a second. It's free to join. And if you're coming through Lucid instead, and you want to sign up for the ink, I invite you to do that. Take a minute and tell us if you did in the chat. Tell us if you're one of the people who is
You're
just doing
giving
that right now.
a homework assignment.
Homework assignment right now. Um, I actually wanted to turn to that kind of personal level of love, kindness, these things. I was at a um, the opposite of fascism yesterday, which is a party, and it was a great afternoon, Sunday afternoon party, actually for Chris Hayes's new book, The Siren's Call, which is an um, excellent book about the theft of all of our attention by information oligarchs and the fight to win it back. Really good book. And at this party, I ran into a kind of acquaintance of mine who is a really thoughtful person, works in politics, has worked in politics, academic, great progressive person. And I asked her how, she asked me how I was doing. I was like, great, because I have just learned to separate how
Hmm.
I'm doing from how all of this is doing. I have to. I mean, I can't wake up every day in the doldrums. Um, and she was kind of taken aback by my saying I'm doing great. And she's like, "How could you be doing great?" I was like, "Well, I have to. You got to do great. I mean,
Yeah,
and then as I spoke to her, she said she felt a kind of guilt
yeah.
enjoying anything in her personal life right now. She felt a guilt having friends over and having a good time. She felt a guilt saying to someone at a party that she's having a nice time, she's having a good day, whatever. And it felt both strange to me and understandable. And since you're a historian with a lot of authority about this, I think I know your feelings about this, but I would love you to address that feeling that I think a lot of people have. There's something wrong about having fun right now. There's something wrong about gathering with people. There's something wrong about enjoying anything in your life. There's something wrong about having fun. Like, it feels so off to me, but I don't have the historical knowledge that you do to back up why it feels off. Can you talk directly to those people who feel, because I know you're probably surrounded by them also. Talk to them directly.
Well, it's understand. I mean, it's good that I mean, it's understandable that we feel distressed, and we may feel that we have to be 100% focused on immediately doing everything possible to stop this creeping fascism. But um, if we look at the history of resistance, that is a recipe for burnout. Like again, it's we're only on day 7. The guy's going to be there for at least 4 years, and God knows what. I don't have much patience with people who are like, well, we're going to write articles about him not leaving in 4 years. Okay, that's like a different. Let's just talk about now. But you can't burn out, and it's really important to have balance. um and I personally have, I mean, I dwell in this, like, I'm in the heads of these, or they're in my head, this dark people all the time, right? It's terrible, and that's how I know how they think. But I also know it's really important to have separation. And I've had this giant desire to, like, be with friends and also to laugh, like, to just humor, and not just humor, not just political humor at poking at them, because that's, but just to laugh and to feel alive. Because if we deplete our energies immediately, and we don't have it's like a work life balance, even though the politics is personal. Yes, we can't really separate, but we have to, because we'll get burned out and then we won't be effective to our goals. And one last thing I wanted to say, it's so interesting to be living through this, considering what I've studied for years. There's a story told by a guy, Ignazio Silone, who was a communist. He was a member of the Communist Party, and he had to go into hiding. Um, and he was in the safe house, and this is his memoir of his. And he recounted, another guy arrived, another communist in hiding, and this was when Mussolini first declared dictatorship. So they're going out to round everybody up, and the guy comes in and he says, everybody's standing in line at La Scala Opera House to see the opera. And so I was like, oh, how interesting. uh, Mussolini's trucks are going out with the police, and the squadrons are beating people up again because he's declared dictatorship. And there are people who don't care, and they're just like, I'm just going to the opera. But I was thinking about this because we're living through the beginnings of something, and we're going to parties, we're doing stuff, and we're also doing our work. So I think of that story a little differently now. It's really interesting because you can say, well, how could they be going to the opera when the dictatorship was starting? But people didn't know that it was going to be a 17-year dictatorship. On on the other hand, had they reacted before, maybe Mussolini wouldn't have been in that place to do that. So anyway, it's a great question. And I see why people feel guilty, and that's a sign that you care. That's a sign of your empathy, and so that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's going to be very helpful to people.
I mean, we're all just figuring this out ourselves, as you see from my comments. Um, but being together, talking to each other, um, not burning out. I'm actually trying to take more time to do yoga and just like take a beat. Um, some returning to your creative stuff. It's all good because, um, each one of us knows our limits, our resources, and it's a time for reflection too, so that we don't do the things in the short term that are, and we neglect the long term. And a lot of Anand's work is about long term strategy. So, um, to be continued.
And I'll say one more thing about that before we go. I think I so agree with that. And it also strikes me that um, an underappreciated reason we are in this situation right now is that at some very visceral level at the end of the day, a very large number of largely apolitical people showed up on election day and probably did not vote
Yeah.
on the things that you and I would want them to vote on, which is what is the details of this immigration policy or what are the details of these two healthcare plans. I mean, almost self evidently, they did not vote on that basis. They voted, probably most people, on the basis of things like instincts like um, sportscaster Stephen A. Smith, who I don't agree with a lot of the issues, but he said this weekend on Bill Maher. He said, people voted like who is closer to normal. They're like basic subjective perception of who's closer to normal. And what in what state is the pro democracy movement that a lot of people perceived Donald Trump, knowing
Yeah.
who he is, as closer to normal? Or
Yeah.
I think another question people have is, like, frankly, which side is more of a party? And I don't mean party in the political sense. I mean it in the Saturday night sense. And again, you can sneer at people having that kind of vibey relationship to politics that maybe someone with all the books behind you does not necessarily have, but you actually know more than most people in the world, that kind of basic sense of like, is this a kind of
Yeah.
thing I want to be part of or not,
Yeah.
is not trivial, it's not silly, and it's the reason these historical swerves happen one way or the other. And so the work of actually resisting all these things, but also building the fun, joyful, inviting alternative in this period, which is gathering, which is having connections, which is having circles of people who talk, which is having, real discussions, but also real fun with each other, and not just living online, I think is so important. And it's political work, even if it doesn't feel like it on a given Sunday.
Totally. Totally. Um, Anat Shankar Osorio says if no one's coming to your party, you've got to throw a better party and about the Democrats.
Yeah.
So
All right, everyone. We want you to, you're hearing it from us. Throw a part. It's your homework over the next week. And maybe Ruth, what I want to know, what if Ruth and I have been thinking about maybe doing this regularly, maybe every Monday at lunchtime. So will you tell us in the chat
yeah.
if you'd like us to make this a regular series? Would you be up for it? And thank you all for joining. It's
Thank
really really
you.
awesome, and thank you, Ruth, for making the time, and all of you for joining.
Thank you, Anand. It's always great. It's great to see everybody's comments. I'm writing down some of them, how to make kindness cool. So thank you all. All
And we're
right.
going to keep at it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Until
Bye.
soon. Bye.
Okay. Bye.